and something to be determined on an individual case-by-case basis. So, you know, snakes, cetaceans, insects, however you want to handle it is probably fine. It's fantasy, whatever. I said yes. You know, the more studies you do of paws and feet, the easier time you're going to have making fantasy out of it that looks realistic and looks like it would work in the real world. So, a very brief thing on, hooves. Just the outsides of them. Very rough because I'm not very good at hooves yet. I don't draw them very often. One thing a lot of people miss on horses is what's called the frog. The bottom of the hoof is not a solid piece. There's the hard part with nail, which is where the horseshoe attaches, and then there's a soft part in the middle called the frog. Most cloven-hoofed animals have dew claws at the back, so I draw it from behind. You have these dew claws here. Most, but not all, cloven-hoofed animals do not have a frog. Some of them do. Look up on a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, if you're drawing a fantasy cloven-hoofed animal, you can guess that it is not going to have a frog. And that's not counting weird cloven-hoofed animals like rhinos and giraffes and whatnot. Well, rhinos not really hooves, but you get the idea. So that's that. Okay, moving on to color theory. Most people have been taught color theory with a color wheel, with red opposite green, blue opposite orange, pink opposite purple opposite yellow, etc. Recent studies show that this is incorrect, that it's based on an outdated concept of red, blue, and yellow being primary colors for pigments. In fact, as any printer will know, the actual primary colors for pigments are a lot closer to magenta, cyan, and yellow. So color is more easily described by what's called a color solid than by a color wheel. Color solid, which this is a chunk of, would have white at the top, black at the bottom, gray in the middle, and fully saturated colors around the edges. I'm going to give you guys a link to a website, which is a fabulous read, but rather long and a bit tedious at times. But stick with it and you will learn tons. And different colors hit their full saturation points at different heights on the color solid, with blue being the lowest and yellow being the highest, the closest to white. This is why you end up with muddy colors when you try to mix pure hues, because they actually have different levels of black and white in them. And as it shows on this diagram, hue describes what color you're looking at. Chroma describes how saturated it is, how far from gray it is. and value describes how light or dark it is. Generally, when you're working on an image, the most important thing is not going to be the color, it's going to be the value. If your values are wrong, your colors are going to look wrong. If your values look right, your colors can be kind of forgiven. And of course, with magenta and yellow and cyan being the primary colors for pigment, and digital art, which mimics pigment unless you're using an additive layer, you're going to have contrasts like red versus cyan, purple versus green, or magenta versus green, rather, blue versus yellow. So that sort of skews everything a bit. So if you've ever wondered why red and green don't look very good together, it's because they're not supposed to go together. They're not actually complementary colors. So any questions on that, or should I keep going? Okay. Another thing is that most people tend to, so when they're starting out, people want to try to shade with gray and black and highlight with gray and white. That is going to lead to your drawings looking flat and unrealistic. Also, people want to use the color dodge and color burn tools. Also going to lead to the same problem because what they're doing is adding white and black. Bringing your colors closer to black or closer to white, respectively. Generally speaking, you can talk about something called local color. If I have a green ball, the local color of the ball is green. The shadow of the ball, let's say we're in a yellow lit room, the shadow is going to be blue. Sort of a gray blue, but still a blue. The shadow is generally the opposite color of what the light is, what your light source is, generally speaking. This is affected by a lot of other things, but that's a general rule. And your highlight is going to be the same color as the light source, except close to white. So a yellow light. It's not quite yellow enough. And you can exaggerate this to great effect, but you don't have to exaggerate it unless you actually want to. You can make it pretty close to gray and still have it look realistic, but if you go full on gray, it's just going to flatten it out. You don't want to use true whites or true blacks in your painting except for areas that you want to draw the most attention to, and usually right next to each other for your area of high contrast. We're talking about digital art here. You can achieve a true black and a true white, and that's generally something to avoid. If we look at, the same green sphere, and this time we shade it with black, getting it on the sphere, and highlight it with white, you can see that looks a lot more cartoony and plasticky. There's also something called reflected color. So let's say that our balls are on a blue ground. The reflected color is going to be blue. So you have this slight light of blue coming up from the ground. No worries, Tyler. Thanks for showing up. And then you have what we're going to refer to as the drop shadow, which is the shadow cast by the object. And your points of darkest shadow are going to be in two places. First, they're going to be here, where the dark meets the light. Something called the Terminator. Ooh, spooky. Because that's the area that is not touched by the reflected light, and so is much darker than everything else. And then you're also going to have a very dark part where it meets the ground. But that's going to be less noticeable. Basically where two objects touch, and the Terminator is going to be the darkest area of your shadows. So we have the okay, sorry, I'm just trying to think out loud here. We have highlight, which I'm spelling wrong. Mid-tone, which is where the local color shows through. Terminator, which is the super dark area. Reflected light, which is this area. Cast shadow, which is this. And on something that's really shiny, you're also going to have something called a specular. And the specular, often not where you think it is. It's not where the light direction is coming from. It's where the light bounces off the object and meets your eye at a right angle. Sorry for bumping the mic.